Welcome to this tutorial about how to make a coaster with your lovely twine that you've been making. Here I've got some coasters and I'm going to show you two methods to make them. These two I have done with by hand. You might recognise the blanket stitch there, and you can see I actually, I do use them. They're very useful, obviously. Some tea stains there. So I'm going to show you that method first, and then we will move on to doing it by machine. So you can have a look at both methods and try both out. So let me show you first what you are going to need. We obviously need our length of twine, and just under 2 meters is going to make you one coaster. You need a needle and some yarn or embroidery thread, whatever you have lying around, and it depends how kind of chunky you want that to look. So on this one, this is some scraps of wool that I've used at the end of a ball that I had, and I've chosen a contrasting colour, whereas here I've chosen white to fit in with the colour of the twine. So that's up to you. That's whatever style choice you want to make, and obviously your needle needs to be, your eye needs to be big enough to for the thread that you're using. Okay, so let's thread our needle first. You just want a length that is comfortable to pull through, so less than an arm's width. And I'm just going to start off by showing you on this one what the method is, because it's quite hard to see when we begin. Now we're going to be you can see we're going to be coiling the twine around, and if we imagine that this is still continuing on, I'm going to call this outer layer, layer 1. The next layer is layer 2, and the next one is layer 3. And when we do the stitch, we want to put our needle in between layer 2 and 3. So what I did there was a blanket stitch. So I bring my needle up between layer 2 and 3. There it is. And I'm just leaving a loop, and I'm putting my needle through that loop, and that creates our blanket stitch. Okay, so that's the stitch that we are going to use. To get started, you want to just tie your yarn to the end of your twine, just a double knot so that it doesn't come off when you pull on it. And we're going to start twisting it clockwise. Okay, you can see that I haven't got a knot on the end of my yarn because what you run the risk of potentially happening is that if your twine is particularly thick, then your knot might kind of protrude out like this one, and obviously then your coaster isn't flat. So I'm going to show you what to do, but if you are finding it a bit fiddly, then you can always put a knot here, and it does make it a bit easier to coil it around a knot. We're going to coil round maybe like 1.5 times, put my needle up through the middle and do my blanket stitch. And you can see I need to sort of hold on to all the layers to keep it in place at this stage. Up through the middle again, and my blanket stitch. Now the thinner your twine is, the longer it's going to take to grow. So if you've made your twine quite thick, then you'll find that your circle gets quite large more quickly. And you can see that I'm doing the stitches fairly close to each other at this stage. If you do them too far apart, then your then your coil will kind of want to bow upwards. So you want to keep it as flat as possible by keeping those stitches close together. Now you can just about see that I've got my 3 layers of twine. So I've got 1, 2, 3. So I can now be looking at putting my needle in between layers 2 and 3, through the loop and pull. So this stage is probably the trickiest, like most crafts. When you begin, it's kind of the hardest to get used to, but do persevere. It will turn into a coil as you go around. But like I said, if you are finding that really difficult, then you can try with starting with a knot, and it just gives you a bit more of a kind of anchor to be coiling around. So here I've got my layer 1 on the outside, layer 2 and layer 3. So I'm putting my needle between layer 2 and 3. From underneath, pull up and through that loop, and that is my blanket stitch. And you continue like that. And the next thing I need to show you is how to, just put a new piece of yarn in, and there's another stitch that I can show you as well. I've obviously chosen a contrasting colour here so that you can see what I'm doing, but you might want to choose a yarn that is matching your coaster, or perhaps you would like to make a feature out of the stitch, so that's completely up to you. Depends how multicoloured your twine is. Now I'm getting to the stage where my stitches are almost kind of lining up with each other. So what I mean is, where I'm gonna put my needle through is actually very close to an existing stitch. So instead of going from underneath, from in between layers 2 and 3, what I can actually do is put my needle instead through that stitch and do my blanket stitch that way. So I'll show you again here, because I've got another bit here. Instead of coming in between layers 2 and 3, I'm instead putting my needle through that stitch and doing my blanket stitch like that. And it just makes your stitches a little bit neater and doesn't use as much yarn as well. Here, this stitch is a bit too far away, so I'm going to go back to the original way so that my stitches aren't too far away. But now I could do that method again, where I'm putting the needle into that stitch, into that stitch there, and then through the loop. So I'm just going to keep going until I run out of this piece of yarn here to show you how we add a new piece in, and I hope that you are managing to follow along with what I'm doing. Obviously you can rewind at any point to kind of see anything again, and if you've got any questions, do just get in touch however you got this video. Now I'm going to stop here, and I'm going to just go over that same stitch again so that it's sort of like a double knot, if you like, and I'm going to get a new piece of yarn. Okay, so for the next piece of yarn, I'm just going to put my needle up where I want to do the next stitch, pull until I've just got a little bit left, and then there's a couple of things you can do, so it depends. You can either kind of go up again and, you know, knot it that way, or you can knot it to the end of the other piece. So whichever you kind of prefer to do. So I've just knotted them there. Or you can just kind of hold on to the tail and go up in that same place and do your blanket stitch to keep it in place. And now what you want to do is you want to think about stitching with these tails in place. So when you're coiling your twine round, to include these tails so that they get trapped in the project rather than sticking out and looking messy. Okay, so I'm going to just do that, make sure that they're hidden and tucked into my coaster. Okay, so I'll just show you that method again where I put the needle in through the stitch rather than in between the layers. So here I've just done my stitch there, and my next one can be here. So I'm coming from underneath and I'm putting the needle in that stitch and then through the loop for my blanket stitch. So from underneath in this stitch here, through the loop and blanket stitch. Okay, so you just keep going around until your coaster is the size that you want. I would recommend, let's see what this one is, 4 to 5 inches in diameter is a kind of, you know, I would say a standard size. And what you want to do when you get to the end is you just want to cut your twine at an angle, and that just makes it, you know, a bit neater. But, you know, I bet you didn't even kind of notice that when I first showed you. So once it's in use and with a nice cup on it, you won't kind of notice that end. Okay, and you just want to do a, so if I was finishing off here, you would just want to do a second stitch in the same place as a double knot, as a finishing knot. Okay, so I'm going to take you over to my sewing machine now to show you how we do it on the machine. Okay, and you might be able to see we're using a zigzag stitch. So let's go. Okay, so my machine is a Brother and it's got a lovely fancy electronic screen on it, and I'm going to choose stitch 5, which is a zigzag stitch. Okay, and what I'm also going to do is change the stitch length to just one up, so it's at 1.6, and also I'm going to change the width of the zigzag stitch again just by 1, so it's now at 4, and that just means that the stitch is wide enough to kind of grab the sides of the twine. Okay, so I don't know what machine you have, but you'll have to kind of translate that to whatever your machine does, or just, you know, to experiment as well. I obviously did a bit of experimenting before I found that these measurements worked best to grab the twine. I keep it at, you know, my normal kind of tension, which is at 4. And if your twine is particularly thick, then you can also kind of put in a more heavy duty needle if you want to, but I haven't found that that's necessary. So you want to start in a similar way that we did with the hand method. You just want to coil, again with no knot to avoid having a lump. You want to just coil it round anti-clockwise and use the foot to kind of trap that into position. I'm on the zigzag stitch like I showed you, and I'm just going to do a couple of stitches forwards and then backwards. I do need to kind of push it under a little bit at this stage because it's so small, and I want to lift the foot and keep turning it so that when my stitches are going forward, it's actually trapping the bit of twine that I want. So I can only do a little bit at this stage, lift and turn, lift, turn. And if your middle section didn't quite get sort of stitched together, then you can put it back to a straight stitch and do just a straight stitch along to kind of trap that bit that didn't quite get caught at the start. And back. So I'm back to doing my zigzag. So I'm just continuing to twist it round little by little and feeding that loose bit of twine and just holding it next to the coil that I've made. And again, your choice of thread colour is up to you. It depends if your twine is multicoloured like mine. I happen to have a brown thread in, so I'm just going with that. You can see that it's, yeah, the colour goes well actually with the colours that I've got here. So I'm going to keep going. And when I'm happy with this length or this size of coaster, so I'm just getting my, yeah, it's 4 inches, which is what the other one was. Obviously it's good to have them all matching. Then I'm just going to sort of cut the twine where I want it to end. And when I get to this very end bit, I just want to carefully use my scissors to hold it in there, to hold it against the twine, because it can, you know, it can tend to want to fly away. So we just hold it really carefully. Go backwards. And then I can just trim that a little bit if I want to. And there we have it. So good luck with your coaster making, and I would love to see how you got on. It's always really lovely receiving photos of your makes. So do let me know if you have any questions, and have fun with it.